Hello, everybody. Hello, and welcome to Memory Cafe's event this afternoon. We're so happy to have all of you here. Let's have Erin Bonitto and Chris stand. We are especially happy to have them here today because up until a few hours ago, we did not know that they would make it. And so, yeah, it was a little bit scary this morning thinking, okay, now what are we gonna do if they're not able to get here? The roads were not good. She's from down the St. Cloud area. So really, really nice to have Erin and Chris here. Thank you for your renewed commitment to get here today. And thank you for all of you for being here today. So we are really thrilled as an organization to present this kind of a high quality educational event to the community. It's what we do and we take great pleasure in doing it. It's one of the mission statements of Memory Cafe is to provide a really high quality education, not just to the people that we serve and their loved ones, but to the community at large, because there is such a dire need for dementia education, high quality dementia education in the community. So we have three real primary goals for this afternoon in just the 2 hours that we have together. Number one is we're going to sing and make some music together with our beautiful new friend, Deb McTaggart, a music therapist. So she will start our afternoon together and she'll bring it to a close at the end of the afternoon. And then, of course, number two is we're going to learn and gain some really valuable insights and inspiration from Erin Bonitto as she shares her expertise and personal experience and in caring for her father, who until recently was living with Alzheimer's disease. And then three, I am just really privileged to be able to offer a warm invitation to each of you to share Memory Cafe's vision for Giving Hearts Day this year. We have some big goals this year, and we're really excited to communicate those goals to you and the reason we have those goals this afternoon. So those are the three primary goals of what we'll do this afternoon. And so unless anybody has any questions or anything like that, I think we'll go ahead and do it, shall we? All right, so let me introduce Deb McTaggart. Deb McTaggart is recently, she and her husband recently moved to the Fargo-Moorhead area from Minneapolis. We found out about Deb through the Alzheimer's Association, and she came to visit our Linger, Laugh, and Learn Center last summer. And since that time, we've been hiring Deb to come, or she's been volunteering her time to come and conduct music therapy sessions with our participants on Mondays. So Deb has a vast, long experience of working with seniors in the Minneapolis area. She started several dementia-friendly courses in Minneapolis and is interested in doing that here in the Fargo-Moorhead area. And we invited her to share her time and her expertise with us this afternoon. So let's give a nice, warm Memory Cafe welcome to Deb McTaggart.
Thank you. Good afternoon, everyone. Even though I moved to Fargo from the Twin Cities about 1.5 years ago, I'm not new to this area. I actually grew up in Frazee. Does anybody know where Frazee is in Minnesota? Oh, I see some hands. Yep. It's my hometown. But Fargo has changed a lot since I left Frazee back in the late 1970s. Well, when Deb asked me to do an opening and closing song, I kind of went through my little music library in my head, and I thought I want to do a little move and groove. So that means we're going to do a little movement with a little song and just kind of give your energy a little boost as we get ready to hear this wonderful presentation by Erin. I chose a song called Music is Keeping Me Alive. And I chose it, number one, because it's got a very catchy tune, as you'll see once we start singing it. And second, it gives us an opportunity, depending on how you're feeling and how you're doing, to kind of pick and choose what muscle groups you want to move and groove. So at this time, I'm going to ask you to stand if you'd like, but you can also do these movements while you're seating, so you kind of gauge how you're feeling today. If you'd rather stay seated, that's perfectly fine. I was a teaching artist at McPhail in their Music for Life program, and we had a little saying that there is no wrong in this room. So however you choose to participate, it is all good. And I also just want you to be aware that, if you have some limitations, if you can't lift your hand this high, don't, just do a little bit, all right? So I'm hoping that by the time we get done singing the song, it's going to be an earworm. Does anybody know what an earworm is? It's one of those songs that get stuck in your head, and for the life of you, you can't get them out. So Now, what I do up here for movement is just a suggestion. You don't have to move and groove the same way I do. So if your inner dancer, your inner mover wants to do something a little bit different, go ahead. Be creative. That's another thing about this song. You can be creative in your movements. You don't have to do what everybody else does. But we're going to work on, just go through some movements with this song, and feel free, as I said, to be creative and do a little move and groove. We're going to start with our hands. And the song, as I said, is Music is Keeping Us Alive. So just kind of follow me, and I said you're going to catch on really quick. So let's just get a little beat going with our hands. I've got music in my hands, and it's keeping me alive, keeping me alive, keeping me alive. I've got music in my hands, and it's keeping me alive. Music is keeping me alive. Now your shoulders. I've got music in my shoulders, and it's keeping me alive, keeping me alive, keeping me alive. I've got music in my shoulders, and it's keeping me alive. Music is keeping me alive. Now I've got music in my arms, and it's keeping me alive. Oh, it's beautiful. Keeping me alive, keeping me alive. I've got music in my arms, and it's keeping me alive. Music is keeping me alive. In my hips, I've got music in my hips, and it's keeping me alive, keeping me alive. Yeah, keeping me alive. I've got music in my hips, and it's keeping me alive. Music is keeping me alive. Now I've got music in my legs, and it's keeping me alive, keeping me alive, keeping me alive. I've got music in my legs, and it's keeping me alive. Music is keeping me alive. Now I've got music in our bodies, but there's also music in our soul. So we're going to do one more verse. And whenever we say the word music this time, I want you to do the sign or the gesture for music, which is one arm, just like this. And I want you to imagine that you're cradling a harp, like a lap harp. And with the other hand, you strum. This is a sign for sing, song, sound. All right? I've got music in my soul, and it's keeping me alive, keeping me alive, keeping me alive. I've got music in my soul, and it's keeping me alive. Music is keeping me alive. Oh, I forgot my music. Music is keeping me alive. Oh, music is keeping me alive. Woo! Tell somebody next to you, good job. Thank you so much. I'm going to turn the program back over to Deb Call.
Thank you, Deb. That was really fun. I really enjoyed that. So the reason many of you are here today is because you were at our Redefining Memory Loss Conference, caregiver conference back in June of last summer. Erin Bonitto was our speaker at that time. Some of you are maybe here because you did not hear Erin at that conference last summer, and you heard how wonderful it was, and you didn't want to miss out again this winter. And I'm just here to say that was a good decision. I'm glad you're here today because you won't be sorry that you're here. Erin Bonitto is a really highly credentialed, she's well-educated, she's a highly sought-after keynote speaker around the country. And she has all kinds of education and credentials that make her who she is and gives her the expertise that she has. But in my mind, the credibility, the increased credibility that she has is because she is a family caregiver. She is caring, as I mentioned earlier, caring until recently for her father, who died in September of complications from Alzheimer's disease. And so, as we all know, as I know, until you personally care for someone who's living with dementia or some other form or cause of dementia, you really don't understand what that feels like until you live it. And I think that's true with a lot of experiences, and this is no exception to that. And that's what I think gives Erin's message such power and so much beauty and really so much integrity. So it gives me just tremendous pleasure to ask you to just join me in giving Erin and her husband Chris, who is also here today, a warm Memory Cafe welcome.
Thank you, Deb. Thank you. Well, good afternoon, everyone. Deb and Deb are hard acts to follow, but thank you so much for being here today. My name is Erin, and I'm going to ask you a couple of questions just so I can get I just want to know who all is here, and I didn't get to meet every single person. So raise your hand if you did attend the conference in June where I was a speaker. Okay, you all have an assignment. Are you ready? If you just raised your hand, the first portion of today's session is going to be the same content, just the first portion. Just we're gonna do a little booster, a little refresher. Your assignment is to laugh at every one of my jokes like you've never heard it before. Are we good with that? Okay, raise your hand if you have not been at a conference with me before. Okay, do you know what your assignment is? To laugh at every one of my jokes like you've never heard it before. So what do I do for a living when I'm not trying to be a hokey stand-up comedian? What I do is I'm a dementia communication coach and a dementia communication educator. I work in nursing homes, assisted living centers, memory care centers, helping organizations build the best programs that they can for dementia education, dementia programming, and dementia communication coaching. And when I'm on these campuses, the distinct pleasure of working so often with family members and helping you all be the very best dementia communicators and dementia caregivers that you can be. And as I do my work, here's my philosophy. My philosophy is this: you all are already doing a fabulous job with the resources that you have, with the energy that you have, with the knowledge that you have. You're doing extraordinary. And boy, did I learn that on my dad's journey. There were days when I think about it and I think, oh, I wish we could have done this, or I wish we could have done that. There's no place for that. Every day, if you're on this journey, you're doing the very best that you can do. What you can expect today, if you're interested, is I am going to ask you to take notes from time to time. For those of you who like to take notes, I'd get those handouts out right now and grab a pen or a pencil. For those of you who prefer not to take notes, that's okay. Then you have more time to laugh at my jokes. Well, we're going to start, oh shoot, I've already hit the wrong button. We are going to start with this little booster session, Understanding Memory Loss and Dementia. And the way that we'll start this is by giving you your own personalized memory. Whoa. Oh, shoot. I was looking at the wrong screen there. And we're going to start by giving you your own personalized memory test. Now, here's the thing. I know some folks in our group today, you are living with a diagnosis of a memory-related condition. You're exempt from the memory test. You can just laugh at everyone else's results. So here's your memory test. I would like you to think back in the last 12 months. In the last 12 months, raise your hand if even one time you've misplaced a set of keys. Okay, look around. That's a lot. Keep those hands up, keep those hands up. Okay. In the last 12 months, raise your hand if one time you went shopping in a big place and you temporarily misplaced your whole vehicle. Keep those hands up, there's a lot of them. Raise your hand if even once in the last 12 months you had a conversation that sounded like this. You've got to see that movie. It's that one with that guy. You know, he was on that show. You know that one. Raise your hand if you've had that conversation. Raise your hand if even one time in the last 12 months you got up out of a nice chair in where you live and you walked across to the other room to get yourself something. Raise your hand if that's happened to you. Okay, look around. This is a lot of raised hands. And I like to be clear at this point. I am not a doctor. I'm not a researcher. I am not a nurse. I am a gerontologist. But I am in no way able to diagnose anyone here. But if I could diagnose you, I might diagnose you with this thing that doctors and researchers and nurses call age-associated memory impairment, AAMI. It sounds quite serious, but it's not. So those of you who are note takers, if you have your pen or pencil, right now I want you to cross off the words age-associated memory impairment in your handouts. Cross those off. These temporary lapses, little things like misplacing our keys or forgetting our friend's name, forgetting what we walked into the room for, most folks have another name for this. And the other name for this is senior moments. This is serious. Now you want to remember these senior moments. You want to write this down. Senior moments happen to all of us. They are a natural part of life. As we get older, our skin starts to sag a little bit, our hair may turn gray a little bit, and we may get a little bit forgetful. Here's the thing. That type of memory loss is normal. And it's not just from aging. It can be because we're extremely tired. It can be because we have too many details in life. It can be because we're under stressors. But the thing with these temporary lapses, misplacing our keys, momentarily misplacing our car, forgetting what we walked into the room for, that's the normal forgetfulness of everyday life. You all know that dementia is so much different than senior moments. Whereas senior moments are annoying and irritating, embarrassing sometimes, dementia, of course, is life-changing. I know that for most of you in attendance today, you have a pretty deep understanding of dementia. For those of you who are new to this and just learning about dementia, I have offered a textbook definition here. The textbook definition is that it's memory impairment and one or more of the following cognitive difficulties. And we're going to talk about these in a few minutes. But it means that it's really significant memory impairment and then other things happening either with language or with motor activities. When we use these words, I want to be careful, and this is really the easiest way to understand it, that when you think about dementia, there's no such thing as the disease of dementia. Dementia is just a word that describes a cluster of symptoms. So think of dementia as an umbrella term, but within that umbrella, there's always something causing the person to have dementia. I've put Alzheimer's disease in red because very often Alzheimer's disease is the cause of the person's dementia. It's estimated that in the United States, between 60 and 80% of all cases of dementia are caused by Alzheimer's disease. That's a staggering number because Alzheimer's disease is the one, of course, for which there is yet no cure. When it's not Alzheimer's disease, oftentimes it's a vascular cause to the dementia, meaning that there's been a somehow impaired blood flow through the brain, whether it's been from a number of small strokes or a major stroke or maybe a clogging of the arteries. There are many, many things that cause dementia. I've only put a few of them under this umbrella, but certainly at the Memory Cafe and certainly at the Alzheimer's Association, you can get a lot of detailed information about the different causes of dementia, but I wanted to clarify today that there's no such thing as the disease of dementia. The dementia word just is a catch-all for those symptoms. So what are some of those symptoms? The Alzheimer's Association is super helpful, and I believe that I'm working off a different display up here, and I have just done something, Titus. He'll probably come and fix it for me. Anyway, the Alzheimer's Association gives 10 warning signs or early signs that a person's problem might be dementia-related, that it might be. These are easy to look up, and I'm just going to go through a few of them with you on these 10 signs of potentially having Alzheimer's disease. Number 2, challenges in planning or problem solving. For example, and here comes Titus. We should give him a round of applause too. He's saving me up here. I don't know what I did, sir. Thank you. You all can't see what he did, but what he did was just very helpful for me. Thank you. So let's look at this, challenges in planning or problem solving. Planning today, where I live in central Minnesota, meant my brain had to be working to figure out how I was going to get out the door. We've had 10 inches of snow in about 16 hours, and the roads are just crud, and it's cold. So I had to think about, do I have my boots along? Do I have some snow pants in the back of the car? Do we have some cat litter in the back of the car? Did I have a coat along? Do I have my hat? Do I have my gloves? Do I have my scraper? My frontal lobe helps plan all those things so that I can get out of the house safely. When a person has Alzheimer's disease, that kind of planning becomes very, very difficult. And that's why too often what happens is we find a person with Alzheimer's disease who've gone out on a winter day in their house coat or in their slippers and gets turned around and can't find their way back. This is a sign that something more serious is going on. This would not happen with senior moments. Senior moments is misplacing our keys, but this is more serious. Another sign that I want to talk about is number 6, new problems with words in speaking or writing. As my dad was going through the disease process, he called me a lot in the evenings when he was more confused. He'd call me and he'd say, my mouth just doesn't work. My mouth isn't working. You know what I want to say. My mouth isn't working. Of course, his mouth was working, but the part of his brain that produced language is what wasn't working. And oftentimes in the beginning of Alzheimer's disease, what we see is the person does unusual word substitution. We'll hear things like, give me that white water. You know, that white water. And what is the person actually asking for? Milk, right? Except when I'm on the East Coast and I'm giving this talk, you know what everyone in the audience says? White wine. I also want to look at number 7, misplacing things and losing the ability to retrace our steps. You and I may misplace our car keys, but then we retrace our steps and we find them. What would be unusual, and I want to note this is the unusual misplacement. It would be unusual for us to take our car keys, wrap them up in a bunch of saran wrap, put that inside a bread wrapper, and put that inside the cupboard. It's the unusual misplacement of items. If you've lived with a person who has Alzheimer's disease or another dementia, it's possible that you have experienced your loved one having unusual little collections of things. Raise your hands if anyone here has had unusual little collections of things. Okay, I see some hands raised. Who would like to share? A collection of rocks. Just picking them up, picking them up. Where did your loved one put them? Arrange them, sort them, put them in a box. Flashlights. Tell me more about collecting flashlights. Always having 2 or 3 flashlights in their pocket. A little collection. My dad before he moved to a nursing home, lost his wallet. And my parents looked and looked and looked and looked and looked and looked and looked for that wallet. And after he lived in the nursing home, my mom was going through their papers one day, paying some bills and getting things in order. She found that wallet in the very bottom filing cabinet drawer in the very back in a file. That's the unusual placement of an item. So as you look at these 10 warning signs, or 10 early signs and symptoms of Alzheimer's disease, what I'd like you to know is that these warning signs mean there's something that might be happening that's different than senior moments. And I emphasize might, because not me, not you, and do we have any physicians in the room? No physicians? None of us are able to use this list as a diagnosis, but how we can use it is to know if there's something more serious going on that we should be thinking about. Because Alzheimer's disease is the #1 cause of dementia, I am going to go through a little bit of what happens in the brain with Alzheimer's disease so that we can understand it better. So if you look at this slide, you see on the first brain, that's the cortex of the brain. You know, it's gray and it's wrinkly and it's what you think about when you think about the cortex. But if you had X-ray vision and you could look deep into the guts of that brain, you'd see a set of structures called the limbic system. In that limbic system, there's a little piece called the hippocampus. And I want you, well, it might be too dark, but on your handouts, I promise you've got a picture of the hippocampus. It looks like little peas in the pod. We're going to start our discussion of Alzheimer's disease there with the hippocampus because it's believed that that's where Alzheimer's disease begins its march. It doesn't begin its march all over our whole brain. It begins its march there. But the thing is, if you go to potlucks and parties and you start talking to people about the hippocampus, it may make you unpopular. So this is what I've learned in my vast experience. So we're going to rename it. I'm going to ask you, if you're a note taker, to cross off the word hippocampus, because that's boring at parties and potlucks. And instead, we're going to rename it the memory glue guy. Because in a nutshell, that's the job of the hippocampus. Its job is to gather in all this information that comes in through our senses, things that we see, hear, smell, taste, all of this. It gets funneled down to this memory glue guy, and he has to decide in a millisecond if he is going to glue that into a memory or if he's going to let it go down the forgetful river of life. So let's use me as an example. We're going to imagine me waking up this morning, and I wake up with this guy. That's my memory glue guy. I imagine him a fancy little cowboy. But you notice how grumpy he is? He's grumpy because he's got a lot of stuff he has to try to remember. He is loaded up though. He has all sorts of things available to him. He has a hot glue gun for really important memories that should get glued down really well. He's got Elmer's glue for the everyday kind of memories. He's got little Post-it notes. And so now information starts coming in today. The first bit of information that came in was when my phone started beep, beep, beeping at me with all these various alerts. The first alert came in saying that my daughter's school was going to be closed. The second alert came in saying that my son's school was going to be closed. The third alert came in saying that my husband's school was going to be closed, where he teaches. And my memory glue guy said, I better remember these. These seem like important alerts today. But more information came in. We switched on the news and we heard about things happening with relation to the Congress and how we don't have a Speaker of the House yet. We also heard about the tragic circumstance with the football player who was injured the other night playing his football game. The news was on, the news was coming through, but I can't tell you the details of all of that news. I can vaguely remember what was on, because for the most part, my memory glue guy let that stuff go down the forgetful river of life. My daughter lives 2 floors beneath me. So for that reason, we usually text. She's a teenager. So she texted me a few things that she wanted me to know before I left for the day, and I'm telling you, truly, my memory glue guy has completely forgotten whatever those teenage requests were. Other information came in. At a certain point, I had breakfast this morning. That's more information. Alert, alert, that came across to my memory glue guy. She fed us today, she gave us breakfast, she gave us oatmeal and a cup of coffee. So that information comes in. My memory glue guy thinks, should I super glue that? No. Should I use my hot glue gun? No. Should I use my Elmer's glue? No. My memory glue guy decides to put it on a little Post-it note. He jots it down. January 4th, 2023, she fed us. She gave us oatmeal and a cup of coffee. And using a crumpled old note with that information right there, whoops, shoot, I can't forget my breakfast this soon in the seminar. That crumpled little note right there, he used one little set of cells on my temporal lobe, and he pasted it. There it was, January 4th, 2023, I had breakfast. It was oatmeal and a cup of coffee. Here's the thing. You ask me, well, right now, it's been several hours since breakfast. I can still tell you proudly, yep, I had oatmeal and a cup of coffee. Some of you will see me at 3 o'clock. Maybe we'll chat after the program. And you can ask me, Erin, what'd you have for breakfast? And I'll say, oatmeal and a cup of coffee. Someone might want to be really clever and call me tonight. And you call me and ask me, Erin, what did you have for breakfast? And I'll refile a little bit, but I'll say, oh, I had oatmeal and a cup of coffee. But at a certain point in the coming days, what's going to happen to my memory of January 4th, 2023's breakfast? Shout it out. What's going to happen? Well, I'm going to forget it, right? Because let's be honest, it would be really weird if I were on my deathbed someday and I drew my children close and I said, children, I have to tell you, January 4th, 2023, I ate oatmeal. Right? That would be strange. Today, this is an example of my memory glue guy working perfectly. Information came in by text, information came in on alerts, information came in from my kids, information came in from the news, information came in from me. And he filtered and he filtered and he filtered, and he stuck things the way he was supposed to stick them. And in fact, dumping that memory in the trash is also exactly the way that it's supposed to work. My memory glue guy, my little tiny hippocampus, is doing its job. But for the person with Alzheimer's disease or another dementia, and feel free to shout these answers out, how long does this stick? I've heard a minute, a second, 5 minutes. I've heard someone say it doesn't stick at all. Maybe it doesn't even get written on. Maybe it sticks for a day. Maybe it sticks for half a day. All of these answers could be true. Of course, it depends on the situation and depends on the person and where they're at in their disease process. But because Alzheimer's disease is attacking the memory glue guy, the ability to form this memory, stick it, and hold on to it is being destroyed. In fact, what I prefer to say, because this is how terrible this is that the memory glue guy really is being murdered. And as the memory glue guy is being murdered, we hear things like this. We hear things like, nobody gave me any breakfast in this place. I haven't had anything to eat. Raise your hand if you've heard something like that. Sure evidence of a memory glue guy that's being murdered. Or maybe you go and visit your loved one like clockwork in their memory care setting. You see them every single day. And today, you walk in and they say, well, you never come to see me anymore. Where have you been? Raise your hand if you've heard something like that. A sure sign of a memory glue guy that's being murdered. From my dad, he always wanted to know why was he living in the nursing home. And We answered differently on different days, to be honest, but most of the time what we said was, you know, your heart isn't doing very well. And with this bad heart, we know we need to have you close to nurses and nurses close to you because it's not something my mom can manage. My dad had congestive heart failure. And every time we had that conversation, my dad would say, well, you never told me my heart was bad. Why didn't you tell me? I'm the last to know. You're just keeping all this information. A sure sign that his memory glue guy was being murdered. For the person with Alzheimer's disease and similar dementias, technically, what I'm supposed to say is that there is severe degradation to the hippocampal region of the brain. But saying that there's severe degradation to the hippocampal region of the brain doesn't stick very well. So I prefer to state it plainly and say that the memory glue guy is being murdered. And the thing is, when we hear things like this, when we hear things like from our loved one who lives in a nursing home, nobody gave me breakfast, I haven't had anything. Or when we hear things like, you never come to see me, what kicks in generally is a desire to remind and reassure the person. We want to make it better. And I know there's professionals in the audience here as well today. Raise your hand if you're a professional yep, there you are. We're in this business because we want to make things better. So we might find ourselves saying things like, well, you already had breakfast, remember? I gave it to you myself. Raise your hand if you've heard or said something like that. We say things like, well, you know I come here every single day. You know I come to visit you. I wouldn't forget. Raise your hand if you've heard or said something like that. My mom might have been heard to say to my dad, Darvin, you know your heart was bad. We saw Dr. Johnson at the cardiac clinic. Remember? He told you. Raise your hand if you've heard or said something like that. All of these reminders and these reassurances, I know they come from a place of trying to be helpful. Because the idea is if we could just remind the person, if we could just jog their memory, there'd be a way that they could latch onto that information. I know when I'm reminding and ensuring, when I was doing that with my dad, I know that's what I was trying to do. But here's the thing. Reminding and reassuring can only work if it goes on to a Post-it note by the memory glue guy and gets successfully stuck. And when that doesn't happen, and when that can't happen, reminding and reassuring may actually make the situation feel worse. So at a baseline, what we want to accomplish is trying to avoid saying things like, don't you remember? Or saying things like, you know that. Because by definition, with a memory glue guy that's being murdered, the person isn't going to remember, and it can only lead to frustration. Let's imagine it's a situation in a nursing home setting or an assisted living or a memory care setting. Maybe this person is sitting in a dining room or a kitchen, and they see many other people that have eaten their breakfast. And the person looks down, and all they see is a dirty, sticky crumb plate. Convinced that they haven't had any breakfast, they say to the staff, I haven't had anything to eat. Hey. Let's look at what that might look like for the person with dementia. We're going to see a short video. Now, here's my disclaimer. It was 2020. The pandemic had just started. I had no access to professional actors, so I asked my middle school daughter to play this part. My middle school daughter at the time could be easily bribed into doing such a thing. The teenager she is now is not so happy about that. So she has said that if I show this video, because now it's 3 years later, I have to put the disclaimer out and say, class, she does not look like this anymore. So there's my disclaimer, and here's our scenario.
Hey! Oh, Bertha, what's up? I didn't get any breakfast.
Well, Bertha, looks to me like you got breakfast. Looks like you enjoyed those pancakes.
Well, this isn't mine.
Oh, Bertha, that's yours. I brought it to you myself, remember? Pancakes, a little honeydew.
You never brought me any breakfast.
Chris, you made breakfast for Bertha, right?
You bet. She usually cleans her plate.
Yeah. You know, the cook says you ate breakfast. This was yours, okay, hon?
He's a damn liar.
Oh, well, Bertha, I don't think so. Listen, I'm gonna get you a snack at 10 o'clock, okay? I promise.
In watching that scenario, she was a little bit irritated to start with because she believed she hadn't had any breakfast. But who was the person responsible from taking her from irritated up to pretty darn angry? Who was responsible for that? Say it loudly. Yeah, it was me. Helpful little me. You have breakfast, remember? I gave it to you myself. And then when I couldn't convince her, I even called in the expert witness. Hey, Chris, she got breakfast, didn't she? She sure did. Well, you're slow on that line, Chris. Still driving through a snowstorm must have slowed you there. I was cheerful the whole time. I was friendly the whole time. I really wanted her to remember that she'd had breakfast and know that we hadn't forgotten her. But I made the situation worse. Because in effect, I was calling her a liar. I was calling her a liar. For my dad, I'm in the business. I'd linger around a lot and just kind of skulk around and see what it was like for him when he didn't know I was there at the nursing home. And I saw someone say something just like this to him at supper one night. You know, he'd eaten fast and the other guys still had food on their plates. And the person said, "Oh, Darvin, you had supper, don't you remember?" My dad didn't get angry. You know what I saw go across my dad's face? Was fear. I saw his face just go inward. And I intervened, at that minute. I stepped into the dining room and said hello and changed the topic. And he said to me, "What in the hell is happening to me? What in the hell is wrong with me?" And again, that cheerful person was just trying to help jog his memory. She didn't mean any harm by that, but she'd scared him deeply. So whether it's scaring the person or making them angry, obviously that's not our intention. That's not what we want to do. We don't want to cause frustration. We don't want to escalate the situation. We don't want to cause deep concern. So what can we do instead? Instead, we can be the sorriest person that there ever was. "I am so sorry you didn't get supper. I'm so sorry you didn't get breakfast." And we're going to see, again, with the disclaimer, that my daughter looks at it now.
Hey.
Oh, Bertha, what's up?
I didn't get any breakfast.
Oh, shoot. Oh, yuck. Oh, Bertha, I am so sorry.
You ought to be. Everybody else got breakfast and I didn't.
Oh, Bertha, I am so sorry. That's on me. I don't know how I did that. I'm sorry.
Thank you.
But if it makes you feel any better, I know where they keep the good stuff.
Really?
I do. I could get you a blueberry muffin or toast with extra peanut butter.
Well, I'll take a blueberry muffin.
Warmed up with extra butter?
Why, yes.
Haha, I can do that. It looks like you could use some more apple juice.
Absolutely.
Okay, I'll be sure it's apple and not prune.
You better.
All right. I'm so sorry we messed up. I'll be back soon.
Thank you.
All right.
So as you watch that vignette, I didn't ask you to count, but if you were going to estimate counting, how many times did I say to her, I am so sorry? 3, 4, 5. I repeated that, I am so sorry, because she was agitated, she was escalated, and I needed to bring it down, bring it down, bring it down before I offer the replacement. Oh, I am so sorry you didn't get breakfast here. Oh, I'm sorry. That's the pits. But let me find you something good. In my dad's situation, you don't know how many times I said to my dad, oh, and my dad, I have to tell you, he'd be pretty mad at my mom because he was usually pretty sure that she was in cahoots with the cardiac doctor to keep a secret from him. And I would say, oh, that's on me, Dad. That's my fault. I am so sorry. I didn't think we should tell you right away. That's on me. Well, yeah, you should have. Yeah, I should have. I don't know what I was thinking, Dad. You deserve to know right away. Well, you're goddamn right, I deserve to know right away. Yep. I'm sorry. 3, 4, 5, and I apologize for the language, but I mean, that's how my dad spoke. You know, 3, 4, 5 times to bring him down, 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 and then we could start to be buddies again. Sometimes folks will be challenged by stepping into this person's reality and validating their emotion like that. But like for somebody like my dad, I had to step into his reality. His reality was that people had kept secrets from him, specifically my mom and specifically me and specifically his doctor, that we had kept secrets. I couldn't change that reality, so I had to fully step into his reality and validate his emotion. You're right. That wasn't right for us to keep that from you. You're right. We should have told you as soon as we knew. You're right. We shouldn't have held anything back. By validating this person's emotion, this is compassionate caregiving on this dementia journey. And in addition to being compassionate caregiving, it's actually pretty darn useful because it helps pause the situation. It helps pause it. Even if the person doesn't become suddenly your best friend and jumping up and down with excitement, at least it pauses and gives you an opportunity to work with them a little bit more. I've been talking about short-term memory, but what about long-term memory? Long-term memory is not stored on one little Post-it note. This is for short-term memories. Long-term are stored in much more of a neural network, a network that goes through, the music centers of our brains and the emotional centers and the smell and the taste and the sounds. These are interwoven, really deeply connected memories. And what happens is Alzheimer's disease starts to take a little pinch out of that network and a little pinch out of that network. And even if it's just taking those little pinches out of the network, there's a lot of network there where the memory can remain. So what happens is it's more like a slow, backwards, gentle erasing. Sometimes the last few years start to become fuzzy. Then the last 5 or 10 years become fuzzy. Then the last 15 or 20 or 30 years become fuzzy. Oftentimes the person becomes plateaued or stuck somewhere believing that they are like a middle-aged adult, a young or a middle-aged adult. And if they are a young or a middle-aged adult in their mind, then they have the concerns of a young or a middle-aged adult. What are some of the concerns of a young or a middle-aged adult? Where are my kids? I've got to get home to my kids. Or I've got to go check on my mom. Or I don't have money to pay for this. Those might be some of the concerns of a young or a middle-aged adult, and specifically, I've got to get home. Raise your hand if you've heard the I've got to get home. That's a result of that sort of backwards, gentle erasing. In the last month or so of my dad's life, he said that a lot. He said, I got to get home, I got to go home. And we took him to my mom's house, but my dad had never lived there, and that certainly wasn't home. We'd drive him past the house they used to live in. That was not home. We'd bring him to our house, and he knew it was our house, but that wasn't his home. What home was my dad thinking of? Home when he was a child. That was home for him. Now, some folks will ask, and I think of one son in particular. He was really, really struggling with his mom's diagnosis, and he was mad about it. And he said to me, he came to see her in a nursing home, and every day she would berate him for never coming, even though he saw her all the time. And he said, I don't buy it. He said, I think she's just being manipulative. She's trying to manipulate me into feeling bad. She knows I come every day, because if she can tell me about that blizzard from 50 years ago, then she knows what happened yesterday. When in fact, that's not how dementia works at all. That blizzard from 50 years ago, that was stuck. That was exciting, scary business. Her dad really did have to tie the rope from the house to the barn. They had snow up blocking their whole door. That memory was there. And I said to the son, and I would encourage you, if you have some family members that are struggling with understanding this, I said to her, and I showed him like a little memory glue guy, and I said, that blizzard got stuck with duct tape. But your visits, you coming to see her, it's just on this little scrappy note. And if she could hang on to it, she would. I have a son. He's 13. I don't want him to get a day older. And you better believe if someday he's visiting me in a nursing home, I will want to hang on to these notes for dear life. I wouldn't want to miss a moment and forget a moment with him. But that's what happens when the memory glue guy is murdered, is that our more recent memories cannot be formed. It's a little bit like time traveling. In June, I shared a story, and I think I'm going to share it one more time. There was a woman named Betty. Betty said that it was getting harder and harder for her to visit her mom who lived in the nursing home. She said to me, my mom doesn't even know she has a daughter. I'd known her mom for a week. I'd been there on a consulting project. And I knew that her mom knew she had a daughter. This woman talked about her daughter, Betty, all the time. It's just that because she had sort of gently time traveled, she pictured Betty as a 9 or 10-year-old schoolgirl. And when magnificent modern-day white-haired Betty walked into the room, magnificent modern white-haired Betty couldn't possibly be the daughter. And it caused such confusion. So we tried something. I visited with Betty, and I said, this is what your mom says about you all the time. She talks about what good grades you always got. You got the best grades, and that you were such a good girl that you never gave your dad any bit of trouble. And they said they'd always wished they'd had more kids, but if they could only have one, then Betty was the one to have. So what Betty, modern day Betty, started doing is she started bringing in her report card. Look at those grades. And she brought in a school-age photo of herself. And she reframed her relationship with her mom. She wrote to me sometime afterwards and said she'd been bringing chocolate cake, she'd been bringing a report card, she'd been bringing this school photo. And she said every time her mom would just gasp and say, oh, you know my Betty? And she said in this way, she became the friendly white-haired woman that knew her little Betty. She was able to increase visiting her mom. She visited her mom regularly again. She said, it wasn't that my mom didn't know she had a daughter. She said, my mom hadn't forgotten me. It was just different because of that time travel. In situations like this, some folks may say it's challenging. Someone in your family might say, well, I don't feel right lying to her, or I don't feel right lying to him. And I say, when we're stepping into someone's reality, it's not so much that we're lying. We are stepping into that person's truth. That's compassionate care, and that is what dementia care is stepping into this person's truth. Very quickly, I'm going to just comment on a couple other things that happen in the brain. If you look at this picture of the brain and you look now at the gray outer cortex of the brain, there's a part right up here called the frontal lobe. It sits right in the front, right behind our foreheads. I've renamed it the control tower because the control tower is a better name for it, I think. It's really what that part of the brain does. It helps us make plans. It helps us know what to do and when to do it. And that control tower does get hit by Alzheimer's disease and other dementias. And when the control tower gets hit, the person can start to say or do things they never would have said or done. Oh. You could be, if you're a professional, some of you are professionals, you could be walking through the corridor of the assisted living where you work or the nursing home, and you're walking through and you walk past that nice person with dementia, and that person says, oh God, they got a lot of fat ones here. You could be at a restaurant with your loved one. Raise your hand if you've been at a restaurant or somewhere else public with your loved one, and they have said something very loudly that made you want to just melt into your chair. Is there anyone who wants to share one of those? I know it's a big room, but if you shout it out, I can repeat it for everyone to hear. Oh, okay. That's all right. I walked past a woman one time. I worked for a year and a half with this lady. I was the program director at a memory care center. And I would try, if she was coming down the hall, I would just kind of make myself small if I could. Because whenever we made eye contact and she looked right at me, she'd say, don't you own a comb? So whether it is saying unkind things or hollering out or hitting or engaging in sexual actions or trying to initiate sexual activity or swearing, this is all because of damage to the control tower. We want to make sure that we are not inadvertently saying things like, he knows what he's doing, or he's really being inappropriate lately, or I told him he couldn't do that. Because by definition, this is a symptom of the disease. Let me give you an example. My dad, as long as I knew him in retirement, he would always get kind of crabby on the days my mom went with her friends on quilting trips. They oftentimes had 2 or 3 day quilting trips. They'd go all over the Midwest, hitting up every quilt shop that there was to heavy. And my dad would be a little grumpy. I think he felt a little neglected on those days. But things started to change a few years ago. My dad wasn't a little bit grumpy about it. He would rage about it. He would say terrible things to my mom. I mean, just awful things before she would go on her trips. And awful things to her when she came back from the trips. He'd be at our house and he'd put his hand on the table like that and, blankety blank this and that, those quilting trips. The increased frequency, the increased intensity, those things meant something was changing in my dad's brain. It would have been easy enough to say, oh, he's just being a you-know-what today. But those early personality changes, as I feared, but as I knew, were the harbinger of things to come. So even if you feel like, well, Dad's always been this way, or my mom's always been this way, look to see if there's increased frequency or increased intensity, because that may well be part of the disease process. It's important for us to understand and not react negatively to these out-of-character responses. This was hard for my mom. my mom would snap right back at him. You know, she was offended and she didn't want to be talked to that way by her husband. But it's important that we try to avoid these scolding messages and to do whatever we can to protect our own hearts, protect our own souls, and not internalize these unkind comments, and assure ourselves that as difficult as it is part of the disease process, and it's not a mirror of truism. It's just a symptom of a disease. We'll pause there